At the will reading, my father tore the document into shreds and laughed as the flames swallowed what he thought was his last obstacle. But he didn't know one thing. That paper he burned was never the original. My name is Evelyn Grace Dalton. I'm 34 years old, a civil engineer, a mother, and apparently, now the sole heir to a legacy my father never believed I deserved. I didn't come back to my hometown for revenge. I came because my grandfather died, the only man who ever truly saw me, not as a failure or a disappointment, but as someone worthy. I left this town years ago, swearing I'd never return, but when the lawyer called, something inside me shifted. I packed a small bag, held my daughter's hand, and went back to the house where it all started. I didn't expect a fight, but I was ready for one. Growing up in the Dalton household felt like trying to bloom in concrete. My father, Victor Dalton, ran our family like a business, structured, strict, and always with a bottom line. My younger brother Miles was the golden child, charming, loud, reckless. The kind of boy who got away with everything because, as Dad would say, he's just being a boy. I wasn't allowed to be just a girl. While Miles played football and crashed Mom's car without consequence, I was lectured for coming home with dirt on my jeans after helping Grandpa change a tractor tire. That's not ladylike, my father said. Act like someone who might marry well someday. But I didn't want to marry well. I wanted to build things. Bridges, buildings, futures. And the only person who didn't flinch when I said that out loud was Grandpa Harold Dalton. He'd grown the family farm from dusty soil with his own 2 hands. A war veteran and quiet observer, he was the kind of man who didn't speak unless it mattered. But when he spoke to me, I listened like scripture. "You've got steel in your bones, Evelyn," he once told me when I was 10 and had just patched a broken fence without being asked. "Your father won't understand that now, but one day, he might respect it, or fear it." By the time I was 14, I stopped expecting praise from my parents. I learned to measure my worth in numbers. GPA, test scores, acceptance letters. And I made it out full scholarship to Oregon State, civil engineering program. When I got the letter, I remember walking into the kitchen, heart pounding, thinking for once, just once, my father might be proud. He read the first line, looked up at me, and said, "So you're going to build roads for a living?" Then went back to reading his newspaper. I didn't cry in front of him. I didn't scream. That night, I drove to Grandpa's farm. I found him out on the porch, rocking gently as dusk settled over the fields. I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, then folded it with care. "I always knew you were going to build more than walls," he said, tapping my chest. "You're going to build a life. One that no man can take credit for." That was the last summer I stayed on the farm. The next year, I packed my things and left without saying goodbye to my father or Miles. I didn't owe them anything. The only thing I carried from home was a small wooden box Grandpa gave me before I left. He said to open it when I needed reminding of who I was. I never opened it. Not yet. College was both freedom and loneliness, rolled into one. I was finally out of that house, away from my father's cold silences and Miles's careless smirks, but freedom came with quiet that echoed too loudly sometimes. I had no one to call home to, no mother to ask for recipes, no father to ask for advice. But every month without fail, a letter arrived in my tiny mailbox, written in neat, steady handwriting that belonged to no one but Grandpa. No, "Dear Evelyn," no long-winded paragraphs, just a few short lines on thick, cream-colored stationery. "Keep building, even when it's not seen. Bricks only become homes when you keep stacking." The first mistake of a smart woman is believing she needs anyone's permission. Honor isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just finishing what you started. I kept those letters in a shoebox under my bed. When the coursework got tough, or I felt invisible in a sea of students whose parents actually showed up for family weekend, I'd read his words and remember where I came from and, more importantly, where I was headed. Miles never wrote. My father never called. I once ran into a family friend who told me Miles had dropped out of community college and was helping Dad manage the land and rental properties. Grandpa's farm apparently was being leased out piece by piece. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know. Instead, I focused on building my own future. I graduated top 5% of my class, got hired straight into a design firm in Portland, and rented a small studio apartment near the water. I didn't own much, but I had peace. When I got pregnant at 28, unplanned, unmarried, but not unloved, I didn't panic. I just recalculated. My daughter, June, became the anchor in my world. I never told her father. It wasn't out of spite. He simply wasn't part of the equation. And when I sent Grandpa a short note, "Her name is June. 7 pounds, 3 ounce. I hope you're proud." I got a package in return. No letter. Just a hand-carved wooden horse, small enough for June's tiny hands to grasp. I cried that night. Not because I was alone, but because someone still remembered me, still believed I hadn't vanished. For years, life was quiet. I worked. I raised June. I fixed my own sink and read bedtime stories. I built the kind of home I never had. And then, one morning, a Monday I'll never forget, an envelope arrived. From Dalton, Gray Legal Services. It was thin, unassuming. I almost tossed it in the pile of junk mail, but something in me paused. My fingers trembled as I opened it. To Ms. Evelyn G. Dalton. We regret to inform you of the passing of Mr. Harold Dalton. As the executor of his estate, we request your presence at the formal reading of the will, scheduled for Thursday, 2:00 p.m., at our main office in Kershaw County. My knees gave out. I sat on the floor of my kitchen for a long while, the letter crumpled in my lap, the clock ticking behind me. He was gone. The only man who ever made me feel seen. And I knew I had to go back. The drive back to Kershaw County felt longer than it was. June sat in the back seat, legs swinging, humming softly to the rhythm of the road. She was 7 now, bright, observant, too smart for her own good. "Are we going to see Grandpa?" she asked once, eyes wide in the rearview mirror. I hesitated. "Not exactly, honey," I said quietly. "He passed away, but we're going to say goodbye." She didn't speak after that, just stared out the window, watching trees blur past like old memories. As I crossed into town, a strange weight settled in my chest. Kershaw hadn't changed much. Same faded billboards, same rusted signs at the gas station. But the Dalton house, the one I grew up in, looked older, colder. Like the life had drained from its bones. Dad still lived there. So did Miles, apparently. I didn't bother calling ahead. They wouldn't have picked up anyway. We checked into a roadside motel on the edge of town, nothing fancy, just clean sheets and a working heater. I didn't want June sleeping in that house. Not even for a night. The funeral was the next day. Small, quiet, and colder than it should have been. Grandpa had requested a closed casket service. No flowers, no eulogies. Just a brief blessing and burial. My father sat in the front pew, stone-faced. Miles sat next to him, chewing gum. Neither turned around when I entered. They didn't acknowledge me at all. But I saw their eyes twitch when June clung to my hand and whispered, "Is that them?" "Yes," I replied. "That's your grandfather, and your uncle." We didn't stay long after the burial. I took June to the diner Grandpa used to love. She ordered pancakes. I stared at my coffee, barely touching it. I kept thinking of all the summers I'd spent on his porch, helping him sand furniture, mend fences, clean tools. He used to call me his quiet shadow. I wondered who would sit on that porch now. Or if it would just rot in the sun. That night, back at the motel, I tucked June in, then stepped outside with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The stars above Kershaw were still the same, cold, distant, but somehow comforting. Tomorrow was the will reading. I hadn't allowed myself to think about what Grandpa might have left me, if anything. Maybe just the letters, maybe a watch, maybe nothing. But a part of me, the steel-forged part Grandpa always saw, knew something deeper was waiting. Because he'd once told me, legacies aren't just built in barns or bank accounts. They're handed to those who've bled for something no one else saw. And I had bled. Quietly. Constantly. So, if there was a legacy, he knew exactly where to leave it. The law office sat in an old brick building on Main Street, sandwiched between a closed-down bakery and a hardware store with peeling paint. I arrived 10 minutes early, June's small hand wrapped tightly in mine. Her eyes scanned everything, but she didn't speak. She must have sensed the weight hanging in the air. The receptionist gave me a tight smile and nodded toward the conference room. "They're already inside," she said. Of course they were. I stepped in and found my father sitting at the head of the long oak table, dressed in his usual navy blazer and scowl. Miles lounged beside him, tapping his fingers against a leather portfolio, trying to look important. Neither of them acknowledged me again. The lawyer, Mr. Vernon Ellis, stood as I entered. He was in his 70s, with silver-rimmed glasses and a voice like cracked granite. "Miss Dalton, please, have a seat," he said. I sat across from my father. June pulled out a chair beside me and swung her legs, silent as a whisper. Mr. Ellis cleared his throat. "Today we gather for the reading of the last will and testament of Harold J. Dalton, dated and notarized on April 11th of last year. In this will, Mr. Dalton outlines the distribution of all assets, including real estate, savings, investments, and personal effects." My pulse thudded in my ears. The room fell still. Mr. Ellis continued. "To my son, Victor Dalton, and my grandson, Miles Dalton, I leave my love and my prayers that they one day remember the value of honesty. To my granddaughter, Evelyn Grace Dalton, I leave the entirety of my estate." My father's fist slammed the table. "You've got to be kidding me." Ellis didn't flinch. "Including the family home, farmland, all financial accounts, and heirlooms." Miles sat up straight, mouth hanging open. "Everything?" he croaked. I stayed silent. Not out of shock, but because something in me had expected it. My father shot to his feet. "She left. She abandoned this family. She's not even a Dalton anymore. That will is a goddamn lie." I instinctively reached for June, whose small hand slipped into mine. "You can't do this," my father growled at Ellis. "She manipulated him, fed him stories." My father was old, confused. "This is invalid." "It is fully legal," Mr. Ellis replied calmly. "Signed in the presence of 2 witnesses and notarized. Mr. Dalton's mental capacity was confirmed by a physician prior to the signing." But my father wasn't listening. With a snarl, he reached across the table, snatched the will from Ellis's hands, and stormed over to the fireplace in the corner. "Dad, don't," Miles said, half-heartedly. But it was too late. My father held the document above the flames and stared directly at me. His eyes burned with something uglier than anger. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. This paper means nothing." He dropped the will into the fire. It caught instantly. Orange embers danced upward like mocking spirits. My father turned back to the room and laughed loud, bitter, triumphant. I didn't flinch. I didn't scream. I just smiled. Because I knew something he didn't. The paper he just burned was never the original. My father's laughter echoed through the conference room like a hammer. Miles chuckled nervously beside him, as if trying to ride the wave of victory. The burned scraps of paper crumbled into ash in the fireplace, curling like dead leaves. "You see that?" my father said, voice sharp and smug. "No paper, no will. I don't care what tricks you try to pull. Vernon, this is over." Mr. Ellis didn't move. He simply blinked behind his glasses and opened the large leather briefcase beside him. Calm, methodical, unbothered. "Mr. Dalton," he said evenly, "you just destroyed a courtesy copy." The room went still. "What?" my father hissed. Ellis pulled out a navy blue folder, sealed with a red ribbon and a notary stamp. He laid it gently on the table in front of me, but his gaze remained locked on my father. "This," he said, "is the original, notarized and filed, will witnessed, sealed, and registered with the state. Miles stopped smiling. My father's face drained of color. He looked at the folder like it was a bomb. You're bluffing. Ellis's voice turned to iron. No, sir. And if you attempt to interfere again, I'll be filing an injunction for will destruction and obstruction. I sat frozen, June still clinging to my arm, her eyes wide. Ellis turned to me. Ms. Dalton, this will confirms your grandfather's intent. The entirety of his estate is left in your name and yours alone. My heart pounded, not from joy but from something deeper, a quiet, trembling reverence. I could feel my father staring at me, but I didn't return his gaze. I couldn't. What the hell did you do to him? He snarled. What lies did you whisper to get him to sign that? I didn't lie, I said softly. I never needed to. He just knew me. You ran away. You turned your back on this family. I finally looked at him, and I saw not the powerful man who once towered over my childhood, but a bitter shell, cracking under the weight of his own arrogance. I didn't turn my back, I said. You just never looked at me long enough to know who I was. Miles stood now too. This is crazy, he muttered. She's not even part of the business. She hasn't stepped foot in the family home in over a decade. Maybe because it stopped feeling like a home, I replied, my voice firm. I didn't ask for any of this, but Grandpa knew what mattered. He knew what honor looked like. Silence. Heavy, thick. Ellis cleared his throat once more. There is one more item, he said, pulling out a sealed envelope. A letter written by Mr. Harold Dalton, to be read by Miss Evelyn Dalton, upon execution of the will. I took it with both hands. The paper was thick, aged, his handwriting instantly familiar. I broke the seal, unfolded the letter, and read aloud. My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, then I've finally laid down my tools for good. I wish I could see your face right now. I imagine it's strong, maybe a little surprised, maybe not at all. I know what this will means, and I know it'll stir anger. But I don't care about their tempers. I care about legacy. Not the kind in bank accounts, but the kind passed through calloused hands, through women who held things together when everyone else walked away. You've always been that woman. And now, you carry more than my name. You carry the proof that honor skips generations, if it has to. Stand tall, sweetheart. Don't waste time on bitterness. What I leave you is not just land or cash. It's the right to build something better. For June. For yourself. With love? Grandpa. Tears blurred the last line. I looked up, and even Miles seemed struck silent. My father? He turned away, jaw clenched, hands shaking. And I, for the first time in years, felt no fear in his presence. Only strength. And peace. I folded the letter and placed it gently back into the envelope. Then I turned to June and whispered, Let's go home, sweetheart, the real one. The air outside the law office was colder than I remembered. Or maybe it was just thinner, like something heavy had lifted off my chest, leaving space I hadn't known was missing. June held my hand tightly as we walked to the car. Are we rich now? She asked, her voice innocent. I smiled, but not the kind of smile money brings. We're not rich, I said, but we've been given something really important. She tilted her head. Like what? I looked at her, really looked, and realized the answer wasn't simple. It wasn't just about land or deeds or bank accounts. It was the right to live without begging for permission. The right to reclaim a name that had once been thrown at me like a weapon. That night at the motel, after June had drifted to sleep, I sat alone at the small table, Grandpa's letter spread before me. I read it again slower this time, letting every word settle into the cracks I'd kept hidden even from myself. You carry the proof that honor skips generations, if it has to. He had known that my father wouldn't understand, that Miles would mock, that I would hesitate. But he left the truth anyway. In ink. In trust. I opened the wooden box he'd given me years ago, the one I'd never dared touch. Inside was a photograph. Grandpa and me, side by side on the tractor, both of us grinning like the sun had never gone down. Beneath it was a second letter, handwritten and sealed. I unfolded it carefully. Evelyn, if you're opening this, it means you've come back not just to this town, but to yourself. You were never the disappointment your father tried to make you believe. You were my proof that strength doesn't have to shout to be heard. I saw the battles you fought not on a field, but in rooms where no one believed in you. You didn't win by becoming louder. You won by becoming you. This farm, this name, this legacy, it's yours because you've already earned it. All I did was make it official. I love you. Always. Grandpa. I folded that second letter with trembling hands, pressed it to my chest, and whispered, "Thank you. Not just for the land. Not just for the name. But for seeing me when no one else ever did." 2 weeks later, I stood at the edge of the Dalton property, the fields I used to run across barefoot as a child, now wild with weeds and silence. June ran ahead of me, spinning in circles beneath the giant oak tree near the fence line. "Is this ours now?" she asked, wide-eyed. "Yes," I said. "Every inch of it." I expected to feel overwhelmed, but I didn't. Instead, I felt ready. The house needed work, peeling paint, sagging porch steps, a roof that leaked in more than one place. But I didn't care. This wasn't about restoration for the sake of nostalgia, it was about transformation. I hired a local crew and worked alongside them, hammer in hand, boots in the mud. People in town whispered, "Of course, the Dalton girl, back from nowhere, with a daughter, with everything." Let them whisper. I had more important things to do. June started school in town. She made friends quickly. Sometimes, I'd catch her in the fields after class, trying to build little forts with spare wood. "I'm gonna build a castle," she told me one afternoon, sweaty and proud. "You already live in one," I replied, brushing her hair from her face. "The shed out back, the one where Grandpa used to keep tools." I turned into a writing room. There, I placed both his letters in a frame above the desk. And on the shelves, I lined books he once read. Old manuals, war memoirs, gardening journals. One afternoon, I found an old horseshoe buried behind the barn. Rusted, bent, but still whole. I cleaned it, mounted it on the front door upside down. Not for luck. For memory. I didn't touch the money in the accounts. Not yet. I wanted to live the way Grandpa lived. Honest, deliberate, grateful. There were days I missed him fiercely. But then June would say something, ask about fence posts, or remind me to check the weather before painting, and I'd hear his voice in hers. Calm, certain, steady. We weren't just living on Grandpa's land. We were rooting in it. And with each passing day, the Dalton name felt less like a scar, and more like a seed. Autumn settled gently over the land. The fields glowed gold in the afternoon light, and the breeze carried the scent of turning leaves and wood smoke. June and I sat on the porch swing, wrapped in an old quilt. She had a cup of cocoa. I had Grandpa's final letter in my lap. She looked up at me. "Will Grandpa ever come back?" I shook my head, smiling softly. "No, sweetheart, but he never really left either." She thought for a moment. "Because we live here now?" "Because we live like he taught us to," I said, with our heads high, our hands busy, and our hearts open. June reached for the frame beside the door, the one with Grandpa's quote carved into it. She traced each word with her small finger. "Honor skips generations if it has to." "You think I'll skip it?" she asked. I kissed the top of her head. "No, I think you'll carry it further than any of us ever did." That night, after she went to bed, I walked out to the porch alone. The stars above Kershaw were colder now, sharper, but I wasn't afraid of them anymore. In my chest, there was no bitterness, no resentment, just a quiet fullness. The house was mine, the land was mine, but the real inheritance was never measured in deeds or bank accounts. It was in the love of a man who believed in me when no one else did. And in the strength to become everything they said I couldn't.